Oh, Maggie is she is a life coach of sorts. She is happily married. She's pregnant with her first child. She believes in law of attraction, and she's a happy person. And then this terrible thing happens to her, and she is cracked wide open. And I think when she gets put back together, she's a very different person, but a much stronger, more considered, more compassionate person.
Were you ever nervous or intimidated by the subject matter, and what was it that attracted you to the material?
It's a very intimidating subject matter. Nobody wants to tell stories of grieving the loss of a child, and yet it's an extremely relevant story to so many families around the world. And it's a story worth telling. And I was fascinated as to how, as an actor, you would do that. To do it with, to make it real without being maudlin and sentimental or overly tragic, but real and an honest portrayal, and that's what really attracted me.
How do you think being a mother helped you prepare for this role?
I think just being a mother adds a level, a depth that you can't possibly imagine. And I think it would have been very different if I hadn't been a mother. I think it would have been a very different performance.
Do you have anything in common with Maggie?
Yeah, I mean, you always have certain areas. I think I'm as sort of freewheeling in my attitudes to life as she is, and she believes in love. But and I think that my response to grief would be like anyone's, as dark as hers is.
How did you prepare yourself to play someone who lost their child? Can you share some of the struggles that you faced?
You can't prepare. You can't prepare to portray that. That's not something you can spend time imagining. It's too hard, although you have to a bit. You can talk to a lot of people who have experienced it, but you can't possibly. You just have to show up on the day and be open to the reality of the situation and how that would then process. But yeah, I was free-falling through the entire thing.
And were there any particular scenes that were very challenging for you?
Oh yeah, the stillbirth scene was the hardest, was hands down the hardest thing I've ever done on film. And also when Maggie finds out that the baby doesn't have a heartbeat, that was a supremely challenging scene. But there was a lot of, it sounds strange, but there is levity in there as well, because because as with everything that is that sad, there is always humor in there as well. And some of those scenes were difficult to gauge and to do.
How uncomfortable or awkward is it performing with an artificial baby bump, and how much does it feel like the real thing?
Honestly, it was the last thing I was thinking about. I just wanted it to look right, as long as it looked right. They're deeply uncomfortable, but it's pretty uncomfortable being pregnant anyway. But honestly, I think it would have, I don't know, it was uncomfortable, but I don't remember it. Yeah. It was so secondary to really what was going on.
Okay. How do you find a balance in maintaining a creative interpretation of a character while staying true to the characteristics of the actual person?
Unless you're doing a biopic, it was not appropriate for me to somehow create some facsimile of the woman who this story was actually about. I just created Maggie, like Maggie as she was written in the script, which is not a facsimile of Sean's wife, who's the director who wrote the movie, who I suppose I play, but I really don't. I think obviously there are things that happen, and there are logistics that were the same, but she was a creation, Maggie, an amalgam of a lot of women that I've known and my idea of who that person was.
It must have been very emotionally draining to put yourself in Maggie's shoes. So how did you find that experience? What kind of effect did it have on you? And was it difficult to leave that behind at the end of the day?
You know, it was good that the film we shot it in under a month, because it was an impossible place to live and breathe in. But I did. I sort of stayed in that place the whole time that we shot, and it was. I was surrounded by really good people, which was great. But you can't put it down. You can't put that down and then just pick it up the next day. You sort of. Well, I found I had to stay there, and I've never experienced that before. I leave my work and go home. But this one definitely stayed with me. So it was good. It was a short shoot, so that worked out.
How did you and Paul Adelstein work together and build your relationship? Did you ever find a light moment off camera?
Oh no, we spent most of the time in hysterics. I mean, when you're that emotional, it's a pretty thin line between the sort of laughing at a situation for how terrible it is, and there's a lot of gallows humor. I love him. That's just luck, just meeting someone who is clever and bright and lovely and who becomes a really good friend of yours, which we have remained really good friends.
What are the lessons that you learned personally from doing this movie, from understanding Maggie's loss to getting a glimpse of her predicaments and to mending a broken relationship?
That you can take nothing for granted, nothing in life, and that your awareness and your patience and your allowing yourself to be really present, even when stuff seems like it's irritating and boring, to be in it, to be present with it. And I think the notion of strength, the idea that there are certain things that we perceive in our brain that we could not survive, that we can with love and with strength that comes from somewhere. You can't put your finger on it, but it's there. And I saw that with that character, and I trust that in people. I trust that in the idea of survival now a lot more.
What misconceptions did you previously have about fetal death, and do you think that the general population in the U.S. has an accurate idea of it?
I think that people have no idea about the psychological impact of having a stillborn child, because for most people you'd go, well, it never lived, so you never really got to know it, so it's done, so let's just not talk about it and it's gone. As opposed to, this was a being who was created and they lived for a very brief time and never in the outside world, but they existed. And I think, you know that in most states in America, you don't get issued a birth certificate when you have a stillborn child. The psychological effect on that, on a lot of the women that I spoke to, is so profound. And there is a great woman who I am just stunned that I can't remember her name, who campaigned in the state of California to have the law changed. And now, in this state, when you give birth to a stillborn child, you get a birth certificate, and it says in parentheses, stillbirth. And there is something about that acknowledges the life of your child, albeit not a life that we recognize as a life, a different kind of a life. And that is incredibly impactful, and I think people should know about that. I think we need to know about all aspects of being alive, even if it's for the briefest moment.
What does this movie tell you about the healing power of children?
That there is nothing more powerful, and that clearly with with Sean and his wife, having two further children was ultimately what healed them from the passing of their son. And if you can stick around for the miracle of that power of love and of strength and of coming back together, of surviving something that splits you so far apart, if you can allow yourself to help each other and to heal, that that's the sort of fundamental way of walking through grief and of surviving it, you know. Because it looks like it's not survivable to begin with. But what I learned from this was that it actually is.